There are moments in life when everything looks fine on the surface, yet something inside quietly collapses. You wake up with intention, but by evening you're wondering where the day went. You promised yourself change, but the same patterns keep returning like old shadows that never fully leave. And somewhere in that cycle, discipline stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like something other people have, not you. But discipline was never meant to feel loud. It was never meant to be dramatic or emotional. The strongest version of it is almost invisible. It lives in silence. In small decisions no one notices. In moments where nothing external forces you, yet you still choose differently. And if you listen closely, you'll realize something unsettling. Your life right now is not shaped by your big decisions. It is shaped by the silent habits you repeat when no one is watching. The first silence is the habit of delaying comfort without announcing it to yourself. Most people don't realize how often they negotiate with their own mind. Just 5 more minutes of scrolling. Just a short break before starting. Just one episode before work. Sounds harmless, almost innocent. But psychologically, it trains the brain to trust impulse more than intention. Each delay becomes a small agreement that comfort comes first. But there is a different type of person who never talks about discipline. They don't announce productivity. They simply pause before comfort. That pause is where everything changes. In that tiny space, the brain experiences friction. The urge rises, but it is not obeyed immediately. Over time, this rewires reward anticipation. Dopamine stops leading the decision. It starts following it. And what looks like discipline is actually just a quiet interruption of impulse. Nothing more. Nothing dramatic. Just a small refusal repeated over time until identity begins to shift. The second silent habit is doing unfinished things immediately after remembering them. Most people live with mental clutter they don't even notice. A message they need to reply to. A task they should complete. A decision they keep postponing. These small open loops consume far more energy than people realize. Psychologists call this cognitive residue. The mind keeps pulling back to what is incomplete. And so discipline is not always about doing hard things. Sometimes it is about clearing mental noise instantly. Not later. Not when motivated. Immediately after awareness. Because the longer something stays unfinished, the heavier it becomes in perception, even if it is small in reality. And people who appear extremely focused are often not more capable. They are simply less mentally fragmented. The third silent habit is reducing the number of decisions before the day begins. Decision fatigue is silent. It doesn't feel like exhaustion at first. It feels like indecision. Small delays, slight hesitation, a mind that becomes slower as the day progresses. Every unnecessary decision steals a fragment of mental energy that could have been used for something meaningful. Disciplined people unconsciously remove choices, not because they are rigid, but because they understand something subtle. Energy is not just physical. It is cognitive currency, and every wasted decision is a withdrawal from a limited account. So they simplify, not as a rule, as a lifestyle, and over time, their mind feels lighter, not because life is easier, but because friction has been removed from the ordinary. The fourth silent habit is becoming comfortable with starting before feeling ready. There is a strange illusion most people live under. The belief that readiness comes first. That clarity appears before action. But in reality, readiness is almost always a byproduct of starting. And yet the mind resists this. It waits for a signal that never arrives. It searches for certainty in a system designed for uncertainty. This creates a loop of delay disguised as preparation. But some people quietly interrupt this pattern. They start imperfectly, without emotional permission, without waiting for motivation to align. And something interesting happens. Action begins to generate structure. Structure creates clarity. And clarity replaces hesitation. What looks like confidence is often just repeated exposure to starting while uncertain. The fifth silent habit is controlling what enters your environment before controlling your behavior. People think discipline is about willpower, but environments shape behavior far more than intention ever will. A distracted environment produces a distracted mind. A chaotic space produces scattered thinking. Not because you are weak, but because your brain is efficient. It adapts to what surrounds it. And so silent discipline begins externally, in subtle choices. What stays in your sight? What stays within reach? What is allowed to interrupt you? The most disciplined individuals are not constantly resisting distraction. They are simply living in a structure where distraction is less available. And because of that, they don't have to fight themselves all day. There is no drama in this. Only design. The sixth silent habit is ending tasks slightly before exhaustion. Most people think discipline means pushing until burnout. But that approach creates resistance. The mind begins to associate effort with depletion. And over time, avoidance becomes stronger than ambition. But there is another approach. Ending slightly before complete exhaustion. Leaving a small margin of energy untouched. This creates something psychologically powerful. The mind does not associate the task with total depletion. Instead, it remembers control. And strangely, this makes returning easier. Because the task never fully drains identity. Preserves continuity. This is not laziness. It is psychological pacing. A rhythm that allows consistency to survive long-term. The seventh silent habit is observing impulses without immediately obeying them. There is a moment between urge and action that most people never notice. It is extremely short, almost invisible. The thought appears, and action follows instantly. No space, no observation, but discipline begins in that space. Not in suppression, not in force, but in awareness. When you observe an impulse instead of immediately reacting, something shifts. The impulse loses authority. It becomes information rather than command. And over time, the mind stops treating every thought as an order. This is where emotional regulation quietly forms. Not through control, but through distance. And that distance is everything. The eighth silent habit is repeating small actions even when they feel meaningless. There are days when effort feels disconnected from reward. When progress is invisible. When the mind questions the point of continuing. And in those moments, most people stop. Not because they cannot continue, but because meaning disappears temporarily. But discipline is often built in that absence of meaning. Because repetition during meaningless phases creates identity stability. The brain learns that action is not dependent on emotional reward. It becomes independent of mood. And this separation is what creates consistency. There is a quiet strength in doing something without needing to feel significant while doing it. The ninth silent habit is protecting attention like it is something physical. Attention is not abstract. It is not infinite. It behaves like a resource that leaks silently throughout the day. Every interruption fragments it. Every unnecessary switch in focus reduces depth. And yet most people allow their attention to be scattered without noticing the cost. A message here, a video there, a quick distraction that becomes a long detour. But disciplined minds treat attention differently. Not with rigidity, with awareness. They understand that whatever holds attention shapes thought. And whatever shapes thought shapes identity. So they guard it quietly, not through restriction, but through selection. And over time, their thinking becomes deeper. Not because they are smarter, but because they are less divided. The 10th silent habit is ending the day without emotional noise. Most people carry unfinished emotional tension into the next day. Regret, overthinking, self-judgment. It lingers quietly, influencing the next morning before it even begins. But some people develop a silent closure. Not a ritual, not a routine, just a mental release. A simple acknowledgement that the day is complete, regardless of outcome. This creates psychological reset. The mind stops dragging emotional residue forward. And each day begins cleaner than the last. It is not perfection. It is release. And release over time becomes clarity. Because discipline is not just what you do during the day. It is also what you allow your mind to carry forward. And when all of these silent habits begin to overlap, something subtle happens. Life stops feeling like a constant negotiation with yourself. Resistance doesn't disappear, but it weakens. Not because you forced it out, but because you stopped feeding it. There is a moment most people never notice. When identity quietly shifts. Not through motivation, not through inspiration, but through repetition that no longer feels dramatic. You stop trying to be disciplined, and instead, discipline becomes the default way you move through time. And in that shift, something important becomes clear. You were never lacking discipline. You were surrounded by noise that made discipline harder to hear. But once the noise fades, even slightly, you begin to notice something simple. You already knew how to change. You were just waiting in the wrong way. And now the question is not whether you can become disciplined. The question is what small silent action you will allow yourself to repeat today, even when no one is watching, even when nothing is guaranteed, even when it feels insignificant. Because that is where everything begins. Not in transformation, but in silence that you choose to respect.